I was sitting on the seat of the square, one of those days when the sky seemed to reflect the monotony that had settled in my life. The air was standing, the pigeons scaled indifferently around me, and I, lost in thoughts, barely realized time to pass. My eyes settled in an indefinite point in front of me as my brain tried to dodge the worries that haunted me. It was a temporary refuge, that square bench, a space where I could pretend that everything was under control, even though deep down I knew it wasn't. It was then that I blinked. Such a simple action, so routine, but that, at that moment, transported me to a different reality. When I opened my eyes again, the world around me had changed in a subtle but disturbing way. The leaves of the trees, once green and vibrant, now hung dried and yellowish, as if the autumn had arrived suddenly. The pigeons, who once ignored me, now seemed restless, their wings crashing frantically around me, as if they knew something I hadn't realized yet. I looked at the kneaded newspaper next to the bench. The headline faded under the weak light. The print date made me freeze. It was 48 hours after what I remembered. A cold traveled my pimple as I tried to understand what it meant. How could you have lost 2 whole days without even realizing it? And even more disturbing, how did anyone seem to notice my disappearance? I got up with a start, my mind spinning with unanswered questions. I walked down the square, watching the few people who passed by, all as oblivious to me as I were to them. It was like a ghost, an invisible shadow that didn't disturb the balance of their lives. The clock in the next building marked the time with cruel accuracy, every second a reminder of the time I inexplicably lost. I felt a tightness in my chest, an overwhelming loneliness that threatened to consume me. During those 2 days, no one had sought me out. No one had noticed my absence. The indifference of the world around me was a more painful blow than I could imagine. Maybe I thought bitterly I was really as insignificant as I feared. Or maybe my life, which I believed to be so central to those around me, was just a fragile, easily ignored echo. As I walked back home, the sense of displacement did not leave me. Each step seemed a monumental effort, as if I were fighting an invisible current. I tried to remember what had happened before that moment in the bank, but my memory was an indistinct blend of everyday scenes, nothing that justified my sudden disappearance. When I got home, I was greeted by the silence that now seemed even more oppressive. I looked around, looking for some sign that my absence was noted, but everything was in its place, as if I had never left. The emptiness of lost hours hung over me like a shadow, and I knew that somehow I needed to find out what had happened. I sat at the kitchen table where I so often planned my future and realized that now I needed to face a gift that escaped my understanding. Feeling the pressure increasing inside me, I committed myself right there to unravel the mystery of that hole in time, to find an explanation for the inexplicable. Maybe, in doing so, I also found myself, and perhaps finally occupying a space that no one could ignore. My name is Walter Higgins, 72, a veteran of Vietnam, widowed for 8 years. I live alone in a small town inside Oregon. My life is made of strong coffee, short tours, and the front square, where everyone knows me by name. That Thursday morning, as always, I took bread to feed the pigeons. The air was fresh, smell of autumn and dried leaves crackling under my shoes. As I walked down the irregular sidewalk, I felt the soft breeze caress my face, bringing me memories of past days, when life seemed to have a greater purpose. However, under apparent tranquility, there was an inescapable void, a hole that had widened after the death of my dear Mary. Since then, my world had shrunk to the ends of that little town, where every corner kept a memory of it. The pigeons surrounded me as soon as I approached the center of the square. They were my faithful companions, although most people saw them only like a plague. For me, they were a reminder that even the most despised creatures can find someone who values them. As I fed them, I observed the movement around me. Mr. Thompson, the baker, waved from his store. Mrs. Mabel, from coffee, stopped for a moment to talk. We exchanged routine words, a ritual that made me feel part of something bigger, albeit ephemeral. But that morning there was something different, an uncomfortable feeling that the day does not unfold like the others. As I sat on the usual bench, the cold wood under me, I noticed a strange stillness, as if the world was holding its breath. I looked down the square, noticing details that usually escaped my attention. A leaf that fell in slow motion, the tallure away from a windbell, and then it happened. That blink of eyes that turned my reality. When the eyelids rose, the scenery in front of me seemed the same, but something was out of place. I looked around, trying to capture what had changed. The pigeons were agitated, as if presenting the disturbance I couldn't name yet. It was only when I turned to the building across the street that I noticed the date on the clock. 2 days had passed. The shock reverberated through my body like an electric current that left me paralyzed. How was it possible? I was there, in that bank, as always. I tried to remember what I had done before blinking, but my mind was a blank screen. I got up, my knees gritting in protest, and began to walk around the square, every step a challenge to my sanity. No one seemed to notice my confusion. Mr. Thompson continued to serve customers. Mrs. Mabel served coffee as if nothing had happened. It was as if I were a spectator in my own life, invisible and irrelevant. The sense of invisibility, which had been with me for years, now became unbearable. For those 48 hours, no one had missed me. I was a ghost in my own world. Back to my little refuge, the house was the same way I left. The silence was deafening, a cruel reminder that my presence there made no difference. I sat in the worn armchair, the same one I shared with Mary, and felt loneliness weigh about me like a wet blanket. I needed answers, a meaning for that temporal void. And perhaps, when I find an explanation, I could also find my place in this world that seemed to have forgotten me. Looking out the window, I saw the leaves fall slowly. Each one reminds us that time does not wait for anyone. But I, Walter Higgins, was determined to find out what had happened in those 48 hours lost. Not just to understand the inexplicable, but to prove, especially myself, that I was still here, that my life had meaning, even if no one realized. I sat on my usual bench, the one with time cracked by time, which offered the perfect view to the bandstand. It was a place of comfort, a point of observation where I could spend hours immersed in the movements of the world around me. That day, a boy played ball with the typical childhood unconcern, the ball beating gently against the stone floor of the square. Beside, a lady read carefully, her glasses slipping to the tip of her nose as she adjusted the position to better capture sunlight. Everything seemed in harmony, a perfect picture of a quiet morning. But in a moment, everything changed. I blinked, and the sound of the ball disappeared as if it had been swallowed by time. When I opened his eyes again, the boy was gone. The lady was no longer in her bench, and the sunlight, which once illuminated the square with vividness, was now lower, dyeing everything with a golden tone. Time seemed to have jumped in front of me, displaced by that simple blink of an eye. I looked at my wristwatch, a Mary gift on our wedding anniversary, and I felt a shiver to realize that he was locked at 10:10. The pointer did not move, as if the time around me had been frozen at that very moment. A disturbing feeling invaded me, a mixture of confusion and fear, as if the world was preaching a cruel peace. It was then that my gaze fell on a newspaper, thrown near the trash, and almost knocked my cane in the hurry of caught it. The date stamped in letters bottle was on Saturday, 2 days after the Thursday when I left home. The shock traveled my body as an electric discharge, a sense of disbelief mixed with an urgency desperate for answers. How was it possible that 2 days had gone out without even noting? The world around me continued his indifferent dance, oblivious to the whirlwind inside me. People walked, the birds sang, and I was there alone, trying to join the pieces of a puzzle that made no sense. The loneliness, which had always been a constant presence in my life, now seemed denser, more oppressive, as if mocking my impotence. I got up from the bench, my knees protesting the sudden change, and started walking around the square. Each step was heavy, as if I were stepping on moved sand. I looked around, looking for some sign, any track that could explain what had happened, but everything was in its place, unbeatable, as if I were the only one outside the compass. I walked to the bandstand, my steps echoing in the silence of the morning. I touched the wood, feeling its solidity under my fingers, in need of something tangible to anchor myself to reality. I looked at the sky, now dyed by a gentle twilight, and wondered how many times I had lost the notion of time, stuck in my own worries, without realizing the world spinning around me. Suddenly a feeling of silent anger began to form inside me. Anger at my insignificance, the way time had escaped me without ceremony. But along with anger, something more came, a silent determination, a desire to find answers, to prove to myself that I was still able to influence my destiny. I stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath, and promised myself that I would not rest until I understood what had happened. Those lost 48 hours were a puzzle that I needed to resolve, not just to recover the sense of control over my life, but to somehow affirm my presence in the world. I was not just a passive observer. I still had a voice, a purpose, and would fight to be heard. As he crossed the threshold from home, silence enveloped me like a heavy cloak. Every corner of the room seemed to resonate with the absence of any evidence of my absence. I looked around, my eyes landing on Mary's armchair, hoping to find some sign that my presence had been felt. But everything was exactly as I had left, each object in its place, as if time had not moved to my default. My mind was still spinning with the conversation I had had with my daughter. His voice, so familiar and comforting, did not carry any trace of concern. "Hi, Dad, how are you?" The words echoed in my head, a reminder that for her, and apparently to the rest of the world, I had no disappearance. When I mentioned Thursday, she confirmed that we talked that day, describing a conversation that I couldn't remember, a hazy blur in my memory. It was as if a part of me continued to live, even as I felt lost in a vacuum of time. I closed the door behind me, the wood grinding gently, a sound that always remembered the home we built together. I walked to the kitchen and put water to boil, the daily ritual being a rare consolation amid the inner chaos. While waiting, I went to the window, watching the world outside. The leaves danced in the wind, indifferent to my anguish. My gaze fell over the wall, which advanced with precision that seemed cruel to me, every ticker a reminder of lost time. It was impossible not to be consumed by a sense of impotence. For years, I had lived with the certainty that my life, though small, was important for those around me. And now, the revelation that my disappearance had gone unnoticed left a bitter taste in my mouth. I was not just a lonely man, but someone whose absence made no difference. The pain of this finding was almost physical, a constant pressure on my chest. As the tea cooled in my hands, I was invaded by a silent anger and energy that urged me not to accept this invisibility. There was a mystery to be unraveled, a mismatch in my reality that I needed to understand. My mind began to work, each thought one step towards recovering control over my life. I decided it would start with the square, the last place where everything seemed normal. Maybe there was something there, a detail that my tired eyes had not captured. Maybe observing the world more carefully, I could find a track, however small, would guide me in the right direction. I got up, determined not to succumb to hopelessness. The house, with all its memories, could no longer be my refuge. He needed to confront the world outside, even if he insisted on ignoring me. I put the coat, the family fabric warming me against the cold I felt inside, and I left the door, the wood grinding again farewell. As I walked back to the square, each step reverberated with the promise I had made myself. I was not just a viewer in my own life. There was still a voice, still had the power to change the course of events. He would find the answers he sought, and perhaps doing so, he would prove to myself that he still had a place in the world. And so, with the renewed determination and the fixed gaze on the horizon, I went on, determined not to let time or its absence define me. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection stared at me with an expression that I barely recognized. A grue face for time and loss, but now also marked by something else. The thin line on my neck, like a shadow of something that shouldn't be there, stared at me back, a mystery unfolding on my skin. It was as if a forgotten part of me tried to emerge, one remembers locked in the folds of the time. I tried to ignore the mark, attributing it to a mere mistake of the aged mind, but discomfort persisted. My shirt, buttoned, looked like a symbol of the inner disorder I felt. Each misaligned button was a reflection of how my life had deranged, a constant reminder of the chaos that had settled in my daily life. When I pulled the sleeve to adjust the wristwatch, I noticed the scratch that was not there before. The previously smooth and impeccable metal surface now displayed a scar of an unknown event. That little imperfection seemed to scream the truth that I was not in control, that something or someone had stirred my world without my permission. With a heavy sigh, I searched my pockets for answers. It was then that my fingers found a toll, wrinkled and already faded, dated Friday. It was marked by the name of a 300-kilometer city from here, a place I hadn't visited for years since Mary was still with me. Such a long, no-memory trip, it seemed impossible to understand. The discovery made me stunned, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to assimilate the information. How could I have traveled such a distance without any memory of that? My legs threatened to give in to the weight of uncertainty, but a primitive instinct kept me up, an East determination to understand the inexplicable. I opened my wallet, hoping to find some indication that would give me that mysterious displacement, but the space where money should be was empty, a void that seemed to extend beyond my physical possessions, reaching the depths of my own identity. However, hidden in the grade compartment, a double paper captured my attention. I unfolded him carefully, his fingers a little hesitant, anticipating what could be written there. The words, scribbled in a handwriting that I recognized as mine, were simple, but carried an inexplicable weight. Walter, do not feel in the bench of the square again. A direct instruction, as if I was alerting myself from a danger I couldn't remember. The message moved something deep inside me, a sense of urgency mixed with a fear that I could not name. Why would I have written that? The bench of the square, which had always been a place of peace and reflection, now seemed loaded with hidden meanings, a place where time folded and memories drained like sand between the fingers. With each new discovery, reality seemed to disintegrate a little more, leaving me drift in a sea of uncertainty. But at the same time, I felt a spark of determination. I needed to join the pieces of this puzzle, not just to understand what had happened, but to recover my sense of identity, my connection with the world around me. I decided I needed to go back to the square, even against my own warning. Maybe there was something there, some detail that my subconscious mind had captured, but it was still out of my conscious reach. The square, with its worn wooden benches and the constant murmur of pigeons, still kept secrets that I was determined to unravel. And so, with the ticket still in hand and the note echoing in my mind, I left the house once more. Each step toward the square was a statement of my resistance, a statement that I would not give up finding the truth. I was not just a passive observer in the theater of my own life. There was a puzzle to be resolved, and he started and ended with me. I looked for my old tape recorder, which I leave in the room, a device that I didn't use since the days when Mary and I were messing up for our daughter, small-time capsules that captured moments of domestic happiness. My fingers hesitated for a moment before pressing the play button, the gesture carrying a weight that I couldn't explain. When the tape began to spin, a familiar sound filled the room, and my heart shot by recognizing my own voice. If you're listening to this, it's because it has come back. It was 48 hours. Don't tell anyone, and by God, don't look back at the time of exchange. The recording paused, and the followed silence was quickly filled with a low noise, a sound that looked like wind passing through a tunnel, an ethereal whisper that made the hair on my neck to erect. I was perplexed. My mind desperately tried to gather the fragments of what, until then, seemed a daydream. How was it possible that I, Walter Higgins, had made a recording that didn't remember recorded? The words were enigmatic, a warning from myself to myself, urgently in mystery. I sat heavily in the armchair, the leather grinding in protest, and pulled the recorder closer. I revived the tape, listening to the message again, looking for clues in the inflections of my voice, in the pauses between the words. But it was all that there was. A severe warning of not looking back, of not telling anyone about 48 hours missing. The idea of an exchange, mentioned in the recording, reverberated in my mind. Exchange of what? Or whose? A chill came down by my spine when I considered that perhaps, for those lost hours, I wasn't myself. The notion was terrifying, as if I were living a borrowed life, an existence that did not completely belong to me. I got up, the recorder still in hand, and started walking around the room, the sound of the wind in the recording echoing in my ears. The words, "Don't look back," were incessantly repeated, a warning that now seemed to be charged with deeper meaning. What could happen if I disobeyed? What danger was hiding in the simple act of looking back? I remembered the toll ticket I had found earlier, the concrete proof that I had traveled away without my own conscience. The recording, along with the note I wrote for myself, reinforced the idea that something more sinister was at stake. Perhaps the square of the square, with its air of peaceful normality, was the starting point for these inexplicable events. I decided I would need to go back there again, this time with more attentive eyes, looking for any sign, any detail that could have escaped my attention. But the warning on the tape didn't come out of my head. What would happen if I looked back at the time of exchange? And when would this moment happen? The next morning found me standing before the mirror, the family face reflected back, but with eyes that looked more tired, more aware than before. I dressed carefully, choosing the wool coat that Mary liked so much, as if her memory could give me the strength to face what was waiting for me. I left the house, the cold breeze of the morning caressing my face, and walked toward the square. Each step seemed loaded on purpose, every breath, a preparation for what was to come. When I arrived, the scenario looked untouched, a picture of tranquility that denied the whirlwind inside me. I sat on the bench, the recorder stored in the inner pocket of the coat, and waited. I waited for time to bend again, to change it, whatever it was, it would happen. And as I waited, the words of the recording echoed in my mind, a constant reminder not to look back. The wind began to blow, a murmur that seemed to come to life of its own. I closed my eyes, focusing on my breath, trying to calm the heart that beaten out. The sound of the wind became more intense, an almost tangible force around me. And then it happened. A snap, like a rope breaking, and the world around me seemed to slide for a moment. A part of me wanted to turn around, follow the natural instinct of curiosity, but the warning in the recording hovered like a shadow over my reasoning. I held firmly, focusing on the sound of the pigeons, in the rustle of the leaves, everything that anchored me at that moment. When I finally opened my eyes, everything was like before, but a sense of change hovered in the air. Something had happened during these seconds of temporal suspension, something I still couldn't fully understand. But one thing was certain. The search for answers was far from over, and I, Walter Higgins, was determined to discover the truth, no matter how deep the rabbit's burrow was found. I went to the square on Sunday, ignoring the warning contained in the ticket and recording. The morning was cold, and the sun was still hesitating to cross the thick clouds, as if the time itself shared my uncertainties. As I approached the bank, I felt a mixture of fear and expectation. The old wooden bank was waiting for me, a silent observer of the lost chapters of my life. As I sat down, a chill traveled my spine. My fingers traveled the bank's metal arm, and it was then that I noticed something that had escaped my attention before. Sleeping letters and pies were carved there, almost imperceptibly. It was my name, followed by a series of dates, 4 to be accurate, each separated by an accurate 2-year interval. The first date was from 1983, a year that seemed to belong to another life, a younger and less marked Walter Higgins. The last, 2023, the current year, which now carried an even more sinister weight. But what really disturbed me was the 5th date. Unlike the others, it was not complete. Only 2025 was recorded as if waiting for the end, a conclusion I didn't know yet. It was as if the bank, a silent witness to my comings and goings, knew more about time than me. A feeling of vertigo took over me, the world slowly spinning around me as I tried to process the meaning. What could these dates mean? Each of them represented a lapse of time similar to what I was living now, or would they be a foreshadowing of future events, a warning that my life was attached to a cycle that I didn't completely understand? With a fast heart, I tried to remember what had happened in each of these years, but the memories were fragmented, like a mosaic that refused to unite. 1983. I was a man in the midst of the construction of my career, newly married to Mary, and life seemed full of promises and a bright future. But as the years passed, each of the marked dates represented an inexplicable change, an emptiness that was now making sense. Perhaps I had experienced these temporal absences before, but at the time, I attributed the feeling to mere memory blackouts, flaws I preferred to ignore. What I could no longer ignore was the certainty that there was something deeper at stake, something that transcended my current understanding. The dates recorded in metal were evidence that this temporal anomaly was not an isolated occurrence, but part of a larger pattern that was now beginning to emerge. What would happen in 2025? Would I be here to see the conclusion of this mysterious story? I sat there for a long time, the cold wind whipping my face as I tried to gather the courage to face the truth. The square, with its benches and pigeons, remained indifferent to my inner struggle, a scenario of tranquility that violently contrasted with chaos in my mind. Finally, I got up, determined not to allow fear to paralyze me. There was an investigation to be done, questions to be answered, and would not rest until they understand what these dates meant. I looked around once more, hoping that some additional detail emerged, but the square remained silent, keeping its secrets for now. With one last look at the bank, I promised myself that I would return, that I would unravel the mystery contained in the marks of the metal. I was Walter Higgins, and despite the years and the losses, I still had a voice and unshakable desire to understand my place in the world and in time. And so, with a mixture of fear and determination, I left the square, knowing that the path to the truth was just beginning. My destiny, although still wrapped in uncertainties, was in my hands, and I was ready to face what I came. In the bench next door, I spotted an elderly man who had never seen before. He watched me with a fixed look, as if he saw something in myself that I couldn't see myself. He wore a faded felt hat and an old suit, which seemed to have been elegant in another age. Her eyes, despite being framed by deep wrinkles, shone with an intensity that contrasted with her worn look. I felt a shiver through my spine as he realized that he seemed to wait for me, as if he knew I would come. With hesitant steps, I approached the bench where he was sitting. Before he could say anything, he broke the silence with a hoarse voice and laden with riddles. "You came back early? I took 6 days last time." The words hit me like thunder, the unexpected revelation bringing out a wave of questions. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice coming out weaker than I intended. The man smiled, a foolish but full of understanding, as if we were sharing an ancestral secret. "Someone like you," he replied, his voice impregnated with an ancient wisdom. We sat on the wrong bank. The simplicity of the statement did not diminish the impact it had on me. 1,000,000 thoughts went through my head. Who was he? How did he know about what I was going through? What did he mean by the wrong bank? Before I could formulate another question, he began to get up, leaning heavily on a worn wood cane. His movement was slow, but there was a determination in his eyes, something that told me that he was in control, despite his fragile appearance. "Wait," I exclaimed, an urgency taking over me. I needed answers, and he seemed to be the key to unraveling the mystery that plagued me. But the man just threw me one last look, his eyes full of a sadness that seemed to transcend time before turning around and begins to walk away. He laid toward the bandstand, every meticulous step as if it was a path he knew well. I hesitated only for a second before following him, determined not to let him disappear without clarifying me. By the time I arrived at the bandstand, however, he had already disappeared. I looked around frantically, my heart beating hard on the chest. There was no one, only the wind dancing between the columns of the bandstand, bringing with it a feeling of emptiness and desolation. It was as if man had never been there, as if it were a mirage created by my tired mind. I was still for a long time, the reality of the moment hanging over me, moe a mist. The man's words resonated in my mind. Every syllable carried a meaning that still escaped my understanding. We sat on the wrong bank. What did he mean by that? What kind of journey had he traveled to take 6 days? I sat on the bandstand, trying to sue what had just happened. Was there possible others like me, people who had also experienced these temporal anomalies? And if so, why were we all being attracted to this place, to this specific bank? The idea was as intriguing as scary. I began to remember fragments of past conversations with Mary when we talked about time and their effect on us. Time is a strange fabric, she used to say. We're just wires in a pattern we can't see. That memory brought a sense of comfort, but also a renewed sense of urgency. I needed to understand the pattern. I needed to decipher what was happening to me. I got up, shaking the dust of my pants, and looked around one more time. The bandstand, with its forged iron decorations, suddenly seemed to me a portal, a bridge between realities that I was not yet able to understand. I promised myself that I would unravel this mystery, that I would find the man again, and that together, perhaps, we could find answers to the questions that united us. With one last look at the square, I started walking home. Each step was a promise that I would not give up, that it would continue to seek the truth no matter how deep or complex it was. I was Walter Higgins, and I was determined but just a lost piece on the time board. At night, upon returning home, I found a ticket attached to the door. The yellowish paper shook gently to the wind, an unexpected presence that increased the tension that already resided in my chest. "Don't fight the next exchange," the message said in a familiar and disturbingly anonymous bottle. The words, though brief, carried a weight that seemed to crush my ability to breathe. Who would have left that? And how did this someone know about the exchanges? A chill traveled my pimple, a feeling that has become a constant since I started to notice the faults in time. With the ticket still in hand, I entered the home, the welcoming silence turning into an oppressive presence. My gaze fell on the wall clock, which for days seemed to have become just a decorative object, marking a fixed and unalterable hour. Now, to my astonishment, the pointers moved again, and the dial marked exactly 10:10, the same time that all this riddle had begun. It was as if his time was mocking me, throwing his cards in an enigmatic and cruel way. I sat in the worn armchair, the wood ranging under my weight, and tried to organize my thoughts. The ticket, the mysterious man in the square, the recorder, everything seemed to be part of a puzzle that refused to fit in. And the idea of a next exchange terrified me, but at the same time, I aroused insatiable curiosity. What happened during these lapses? Who or what did I become? And, more importantly, how could I keep my sanity while sailing through this maze of uncertainty? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to ward off the cacophony of thoughts that resounded in my mind. But in doing so, I was robbed again for the feeling of falling, a sudden and disorienting movement that forced me to open my eyes. The thin zunido that I had associated with the wind in a tunnel was back, like an insistent whisper that seemed to come from inside my own head. It was a reminder that the next exchange was approaching, like an invisible train about to take me to another dimension. In the following days, each time I was near the square, I felt increasingly pressure, as if the air became denser, loaded with static electricity. The wind blew peculiarly, spinning invisible whirlpools that shivered the skin on my neck. The feeling was both scary and mesmerizing, an ethereal dance that attracted me irresistibly to the center of the square, as if it were a magnet pulling a piece of iron. I began to avoid the square, fearing the inevitability it represented. But despite my fears, I couldn't ward off the idea that I needed to be there when the date recorded on the bank arrived. 2025, the year that was not yet complete, was a promise of something my mind could not fully apprehend, but my heart I knew to be of vital importance. As the fateful day approached, my anxiety grew, each clock beat echoing like a war drum. I knew I needed to make a decision, embrace the next exchange or escape from it. The ticket had said not to fight, but the idea of giving in to something so unknown terrified me. What if I didn't come back? What if the exchange meant to lose me forever in a time that wasn't mine? The night before the scheduled date, I sat at the kitchen table, the soft light of the lamp throwing long shadows on the walls. With a pen in hand, I wrote to myself, trying to calm the internal whirlwind with words that could anchor me to reality. "Walter, remember who you are. No matter what happens, you're stronger than this mystery. You'll find the way back, always." The next day, I woke up with the sound of the clock by the bed, his T-Shay ticker synchronized with the beat of my heart. The zunido was more intense, almost deafening, as a call that could no longer ignore. I knew I couldn't delay anymore. Facing the exchange was the only way to understand what was really happening to me. With one last look at the note, now wrinkled in my pocket, I left the house and headed to the square. The sun was barely born, and the city was wrapped in almost supernatural calm. As I approached the bench, the wind turned around me, a whirlwind that raised dry leaves and made them dance in the air. I sat down, my heart beating unmistakable, waiting for the inevitable. I closed my eyes, concentrating on my breath, allowing the wind to completely involve me. And then it happened. A snap, a displacement, and I was falling again, being pulled to a dimension that was not mine. When I opened its eyes, the square was different. The sun was lower in the sky, throwing elongated shadows over the stone floor. I looked around, trying to capture any change, any sign that something had happened. But the only thing I felt was a strange calm, as if a part of me knew it was exactly where it should be. I got up from the bench, my legs a little trembling, but my determination stronger than ever. I didn't know what the exchange had brought, but one thing was certain. I was no longer alone in this temporal riddle. And as the wind continued to whisper its secrets, I promised myself that no matter how many exchanges they were yet to come, I would face them with his head up, determined to unravel the mystery of time and finally find peace.